Sometimes, facing a harsh truth is better than the torment of not knowing. That's exactly what Maria Leone believed when her 16-year-old daughter vanished without a trace. Initially, everyone clung to the hope that the girl would be found alive. But time went on. Those hopes began to fade. Maria started praying that her daughter would be found, even if she wasn't alive, so she could lay her child to rest properly. Yet, no one anticipated how dreadful the resolution would turn out. The case involving the murder of young schoolgirl Melanie Stacy Amaya shook Colombia with its brutality and shocking outcome. The most horrifying element was that those involved were ordinary teenagers who had recently been romantically linked. Let's delve into this grim story from the beginning to understand how a love-struck boy transformed into a cold-blooded killer who executed his ex-girlfriend. We will also examine any adult oversights and consider whether this tragedy might have been preventable. Who was Melanie Stacy Amaya? Our focus today is on her life and untimely demise. Born on February 21, 2002, in the small town of San Rafael in northern Colombia, she was the eldest daughter in a modest family consisting of Maria Leone and William Amaya. 2 years later, they welcomed another daughter named Natalie. From an early age, both girls were very close-knit, sharing secrets and developing strong bonds with their mother. Melanie showed creative talents early on. She drew beautifully and had an innate passion for cosmetics. She loved painting her dolls' faces along with those of her mother and sister, and even friends, declaring she'd become a stylist and makeup artist someday. Academically gifted too, she did well at school, where teachers described her as talented and driven, qualities which made her both sociable and friendly. She could light up any room. Naturally charismatic, it wasn't surprising that Melanie had many friends inside and outside school. Her attractive appearance garnered attention, aided by her adept use of cosmetics. But life took a hard turn when Melanie turned 14. Her parents filed for divorce then, but managed to separate amicably while keeping warm relations intact. Father kept close ties with his daughters, offering both financial support and active involvement in their lives. About 6 months later, Maria started dating a man named Ruben Morales, whom she soon married. Following their wedding, the family relocated to Medellin, a major city in Colombia. Here, Ruben had secure employment, and the girls found ample opportunities for education and personal growth. The stepfather developed an excellent relationship with his teenage stepdaughters. He readily invested in their education and hobbies, ensuring the girls enjoyed a more comfortable life. Treating them as his own daughters, he surrounded them with care and attention. During high school, Melanie began exhibiting a challenging, somewhat rebellious nature. She became seriously interested in music and even contemplated leaving school to focus solely on this passion. Dreaming of becoming a DJ, she requested a mixing desk for her birthday. Additionally, she had several large tattoos on her arms, back, chest, and leg, bold and brightly colored. Her parents did not impede her quest for self-expression, but were shocked upon discovering that Melanie experimented with illegal substances. Beneath her unconventional behavior and appearance experiments was an individual who ultimately led to her demise. On her 14th birthday in 2016, Melanie decided to host a party inviting all her friends along with a DJ. Lacking funds for hiring a professional musician, but receiving contact information from acquaintances, Melanie reached out to 16-year-old Miguel Angel Perea, an aspiring yet talented disc jockey. After some deliberation, the birthday girl decided to call him. Miguel proved exceptionally talented and possessed notable charisma. He captivated young Melanie completely. Then, after celebrating her birthday, they continued communicating. Within weeks, teenagers were frequently seen together, strolling through parks or around the city streets. Melanie introduced him as her boyfriend. They quickly became inseparable while displaying mutual affection, holding hands tenderly, demonstrating their feelings openly wherever they went. Miguel came from quite modest, or rather poor means, but treated his young girlfriend respectfully and admirably. Captivated by both respect, genuinely almost instantly charming when meeting, introducing himself warmly towards parents, earning acceptance, fostering no interference, supporting relatio. Over time, he increasingly spent more time at the residence tied to his passport, integrating into the family dynamic. Miguel once confided in the girl's parents about difficulties at home. His mother disapproved of his involvement in music lessons, leading to a conflict that ended with him being physically harmed and subsequently evicted from his home. Maria offered him shelter temporarily until things could stabilize, not realizing the potential implications of introducing a disruptive influence into their family environment. Consequently, Melanie and Miguel began cohabitating. Initially, they experienced a harmonious period lasting 6 months, during which both teenagers appeared elated by their newfound togetherness. However, as time progressed, Miguel revealed aspects of his character that had an adverse impact on Melanie. Her academic performance deteriorated noticeably, her behavior and appearance became increasingly provocative. Additionally, she started adorning herself with tattoos and expressed intentions to abandon school. With time, disagreements between the couple became frequent. While they initially attempted to resolve these conflicts outside the family home, such disputes eventually occurred openly within it. A significant concern for Maria arose upon discovering that her eldest daughter was involved in illegal substance use supplied by Miguel. In response to this revelation, Maria initiated a serious conversation with Melanie, who admitted tearfully to limited experimentation with drugs and promised never to engage in such behavior again. Despite deciding it was best for Miguel to leave due to his negative influence on their daughter, Melanie intervened on his behalf, assuredly promising improved conduct for both herself and Miguel moving forward. Reluctantly acquiescing after some deliberation proved to be another misstep for Maria and Ruben, as troubling signs soon emerged. Unexplained bruises on their daughter's body were evident, but consistently attributed by Melanie, either sports activities or clumsiness, rather than implicating her boyfriend's actions. 6 months later, a significant incident occurred. During a heated argument, Miguel assaulted the girl so severely that she needed medical attention. Maria wanted to file a police report for assault and bodily harm, but Melanie discouraged her, stating she would deny everything and refuse to accuse her partner. Melanie's parents tried to separate the couple and forbid them from living together. However, Melanie threatened to run away with him if their relationship was obstructed in any manner. This toxic relationship persisted for over 2 years until Melanie recognized it was detrimental to her well-being. In early May 2018, another intense quarrel erupted between the teenagers, escalating into physical violence. This time, Melanie took initiative and told Miguel their relationship was over. She demanded he pack his belongings and leave her home immediately, or she would contact the police about the abuse she endured. Miguel complied with her demands, but later asked for forgiveness. Despite this, he could not let go emotionally. Miguel began stalking Melanie, tracking her movements and monitoring whom she interacted with, and he regularly called and messaged her. His messages ranged from declarations of love and apologies to death threats. Concerned about this obsessive behavior, Ruben sought a restraining order against Miguel for the safety of his stepdaughter. Nevertheless, law enforcement dismissed his concerns, seeing no threat in what they perceived as teenage drama. Maria also reached out to the prosecutor's office, citing potential danger posed by Miguel. However, authorities did not take her seriously either. They assumed incorrectly that an 18-year-old young man wouldn't harm his ex-partner, a belief rooted in unfamiliarity with his true nature. Mysterious disappearance of a schoolgirl. Almost 2 months had passed since the couple's separation. Miguel seemed to have calmed down and was no longer looking for meetings with Melanie. The girl lived her old life. Her grades at school improved noticeably. She met with friends and practiced music. Her parents also no longer had reason to worry. They tried to cross out the former boyfriend of their daughter from their memory and forget him like a bad dream. On June 28, 2018, Melanie was excited to attend a birthday party for her close friend. The event was scheduled to take place at one of the city's most popular nightclubs. To ensure she looked stunning, Melanie meticulously prepared herself by selecting an outfit, applying makeup, and styling her hair. Once she felt ready, she said goodbye to her mother and assured her she'd be back not too late before leaving in a waiting cab. Maria trusted her daughter's friends well enough not to worry excessively. However, the next morning brought concern when Maria realized that Melanie had not returned home. She attempted to contact Melanie but discovered that her phone was turned off, a distressing sign. Despite this, Maria tried to stay calm by telling herself that the teenagers might have simply lost track of time and that Melanie's phone battery could be dead. Around lunchtime, Maria called Isaac and was shocked to hear that Melanie never arrived at the party. None of their friends had seen or heard from her either. Frantic with worry, Maria began calling all of Melanie's friends and classmates. Unfortunately, no one could provide any useful information about her whereabouts since she left the house. In response, Maria promptly contacted William, Melanie's father, and he rushed over immediately. Together with Ruben, the stepfather, they went to file a missing persons report at the police station. However, they encountered bureaucratic indifference, as authorities noted that it is necessary to wait 24 hours and suggested that Melanie might just be asleep at a friend's place post-party. Refusing to waste precious time waiting passively for answers, the parents, along with Ruben, decided on taking swift action themselves. They mobilized relatives and friends in their search efforts by contacting all known acquaintances and visiting familiar places where she might have gone, while also distributing hundreds of flyers around the city, hoping for leads on Melanie's location. The next story we're sharing is about the Cherie Miller case. Bruce Miller was truly a kind man who carried the full weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He worked tirelessly, often without rest, to support his family, never holding back. His life was dedicated to making his wife happy. He was her supporter, her protector, and her source of stability. But in a cruel twist of fate, instead of being rewarded for his dedication and love, he became the victim of a ruthless crime. Bruce fell prey to the dark side of the internet. His feelings for Cherie grew after he hired her and helped raise 3 children with her. They eventually fell in love 2 years later, and this emotion completely consumed him. Bruce decided to adopt her children to create a united family and home for them all together. However, Cherie concealed her true intentions. While Bruce believed in their bright future together, she led a double life and deceived him. The computer Bruce bought for Cherie turned out to be more than just a gift. It became an instrument in her dreadful scheme. Instead of using it for business growth, she used it to plan his murder. Cherie came to realize that divorce wouldn't bring her desired wealth, and so she resorted to drastic measures by manipulating Bruce's feelings and using him as an instrument in her cruel plot. This case could be seen as one of its kind, a pioneering example where online interactions played a critical role in criminal activity. Perhaps this marked one of the first instances when internet communication became pivotal in legal proceedings. A fascinating development indeed. In today's era, such cases are increasingly common compared to times when the internet was nascent and people were unaware that everything they did online could be tracked or restored. Cherie, like many others at that time, had no idea that deleted messages could be recovered later on. It also highlighted how dangerous it is chatting with strangers online and just how much one's life can change due to this form of communication. There are always individuals who find themselves unexpectedly at center stage, plunged into worlds full mysteries, intrigue. And Bruce surely counted among those people, a person whose story is packed with secrets, unexpected turns. Born on July 26, 1951 in Flint, Michigan, during younger years, Bruce worked as mechanic General Motors factory, but later changed course, opening own business salvage yard, deal-told cars reselling spare parts despite handling large cash sums, dealing different social groups, still known generous, kind-hearted individuals. Sometimes he even bent law falsifying license plates. Though rarely done, didn't have many romantic relationships. Followed marriages, both ending divorce, finally meeting fate, bringing final love. Cherie Miller. Cherie often displayed unusual habits, behavior, according to her friends. She would act as if she were creating a new identity on the internet while engaging in flirtatious conversations with strangers. People's opinions were divided. Some believed Bruce was aware of it, but chose to ignore it, finding easier to maintain the status quo. Bruce valued his marriage and cherished the stability provided by Cherie, along with his efforts to adopt her 3 children. Cherie also aimed to preserve their marital bond. She had affection for Bruce and appreciated the appealing lifestyle he offered, even after she had misused his credit cards shortly following their wedding. This did not perturb Bruce much. Their relationship was as volatile as Cherie's personal life itself. They maintained a working routine during the day and spent intimate moments at night. Amid this familial bliss, Cherie's online alter ego began to emerge alongside her growing confidence. Her chat interactions became increasingly explicit, often focusing on sexual topics with various men under different aliases such as Horny24-21, Love Me Slowly, and I Want to Be Seduced. Rather than sticking with consistent contacts, she preferred engaging with new individuals once boredom set in, initiating cycles of flirting anew each time. As per her own explanation, these interactions were mere playful engagements, a game wherein each new man represented another level of progress that boosted her sense of invincibility. This detached mentality eventually led Cherie down a detrimental path. Amidst her frequent online activities, Cherie encountered Jerry Cassidy, a former police officer residing in Reno, Nevada, and they quickly developed romantic feelings for each other. It seemed Jerry held a special place for Cherie in contrast to previous online acquaintances. Eventually, they even renamed their accounts, Cherie adopting Jerry's Fool, while Jerry took on Cherie's Fool. Their digital exchanges encompassed everything from casual texting and flirting to sharing nude photographs and exchanging sexually suggestive messages and videos featuring explicit content involving Cherie herself. One must remember that all these exchanges took place back in 1999, when executing such actions involved significantly more complexity compared to today's technological advancements. Jerry was born on October 6, 1960, in Kansas City, Missouri. From a young age, he was passionate about hunting and harbored of joining the FBI. He planned to achieve this by starting with the Montana Police. Jerry served as a detective in the homicide department for 9 years, eventually rising to the rank of lieutenant. However, by the end of his tenure, things took a troubling turn. While investigating one case, Jerry uncovered several fraudulent documents within the department. It was clearly an inside job. Acting responsibly, he reported these findings to his superior. Unfortunately, word got out among his colleagues. They branded him a snitch and ostracized him, jeopardizing his career. The situation escalated until it became evident that he was no longer welcome there. After being demoted, Jerry chose to resign from his position in 1994. This had a profoundly negative impact on him. Consequently, he began struggling with alcohol and substance addiction while also battling depression. Not long after these events unfolded, Jerry's wife divorced him. This divorce further affected him as it resulted in losing visitation rights with their son. Despite these setbacks, Jerry managed to reclaim some stability by taking up employment as a security officer at Harrah's Kansas City Hotel and Casino. In 1999, he relocated to Reno and found work at another casino there. During this period, Jerry met Cherie through an online platform and soon transitioned their relationship into real-life interactions. Rather than viewing the relationship as a passionate affair, Cherie started to exploit Jerry. Her influence over him became evident to those who knew him well. He observed that Jerry seemed to exhibit symptoms akin to bipolar disorder. He was highly enthusiastic when Cherie was around and deeply despondent in her absence. It wasn't long before Cherie began her deceitful manipulations. In September, she falsely declared that she was pregnant with Jerry's child. Shortly after, she claimed that she had miscarried due to Bruce allegedly beating her, though this was entirely untrue. Bruce, in reality, was a diligent family man and not the dangerous individual Cherie depicted him as. Jerry, unaware of the truth, became exceedingly angry. Losing his supposed unborn child and believing Cherie was subjected to violence were unbearable for him. a lot for anyone. Concurrently, Cherie dissuaded Jerry from confronting Bruce by claiming Bruce had significant influential connections and substantial wealth that would ensure they faced retribution if they acted against him. Just 1 month later, Cherie fabricated another story about being pregnant with twins. One crucial detail is that in 1995, Cherie underwent a tubal ligation procedure, which rendered her unable to conceive, but she never disclosed this information to Jerry. This shocking disclosure underscores the extent of deception involved in their relationship. On November 5, 1999, Jerry received a disturbing email that was purportedly from Bruce. The message stated that Cherie was gaining weight due to the 2 unborn children she was carrying and expressed her desire for an abortion to lose the extra pounds. Jerry, filled with anxiety, attempted to reach out to Cherie, but could only manage a brief text conversation in which she mentioned needing to leave for a few days. The following day brought another message, supposedly from Bruce. This time it informed Jerry that Cherie would be returning home soon and implied that the abortion had been completed successfully. However, it also indicated that Cherie would no longer be able to conceive. Enclosed in this communication was a staged photograph showing Cherie covered in bruises. Jerry experienced overwhelming rage. He contacted Cherie the next day, and they concluded that the only solution was to eliminate Bruce. They meticulously planned their approach. Routes, a parking spot, and the best location and time for executing their plan at the yard. Driven by his mounting anger, Jerry departed from his home towards Michigan that same evening. As Bruce prepared to leave work later, he received a call from Cherie asking him if he could pick up pizza on his way back, a distraction integral to their plot. Engaged in this phone conversation, Bruce did not notice when Jerry approached him from behind and pointed a .20 caliber gun at him before pulling the trigger. Having committed the crime, Jerry returned home while Cherie set into motion their next phase of cover-up activities. She contacted Bruce's brother, Chuck, expressing concern about Bruce's failure to return home yet. Subsequently, alarmed by her worry, which she feigned, Chuck and his wife rushed over to investigate at the yard, where they discovered Bruce's body with horror before dialing authorities. The authorities first suspected a robbery. Bruce's old friend, John Hutchinson, was their primary suspect right away. John owed his employer over $5,000 and had previously been involved with Shaw. His alibi was weak and he failed the polygraph test. No surprise the police had their doubts about him. Consequently, John was detained for questioning, but due to insufficient evidence, he was eventually released. Subsequently, the case went cold. Officers initially deemed Cherie's behavior after her husband's death appropriate. They were unaware of what she concealed at the time. Shortly thereafter, she was seen enjoying parties frequently. Moreover, she swiftly secured an insurance payout, sold off the business, and withdrew funds from family accounts, thus becoming wealthy overnight. Amidst her festivities and expenditures, she invited her new partner to reside in the house formerly shared with Bruce. Jerry and Cherie's relationship fell apart abruptly after Bruce's death. That was when Jerry discovered Cherie had fallen for another man. He started to feel immense guilt and reflected on the dreadful crime he had committed alongside her. Having worked for the police for many years, Jerry quickly discerned that he was merely a pawn in Cherie's scheme. She manipulated his emotions to eliminate her husband. It dawned on him that Bruce was truly an innocent man. None of the accusations Cherie had fabricated involved abuse, affiliations, beatings, or children. Even the pictures presented as evidence were dated 1994. 3 months later, on February 11th, Jerry Cassidy chose to end his life. He was found alone in the apartment he rented from his cousin, with a .22 caliber rifle beside him. Among his belongings were letters to his family and a note and briefcase addressed to his lawyer, John O'Connor. When John opened the briefcase, he discovered clear evidence of a crime that sealed Cherie's fate. In addition to various pieces of evidence unearthed after Jerry's death, there was also a note where Jerry confessed to killing Bruce and placed all blame squarely on Cherie. The note outlined how all available evidence would be handed over to the police. Jerry expressed deep regret and acknowledged his foolishness in being manipulated by Cherie into committing such an act. He revealed that everyone would now understand why he descended into depression. He had been unable to reveal the truth until now. Jerry also claimed that Cherie aimed solely at securing money and eliminating her husband. She succeeded in her goal, but disregarded the harm caused along the way. Following this startling revelation, authorities swiftly apprehended Cherie and charged her with second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The trial commenced 10 months later, on December 12th. Given the nature of her internet-related crime, public curiosity was exceptionally high. Cherie pleaded not guilty during the proceedings, and her defense attorney suggested that Jerry had fabricated his evidence against her out of guilt. They also attempted to shift the blame back onto JN. During the trial, disturbing messages between Cherie and JN were presented, wherein they discussed using a firearm. It was highlighted that a day after her husband's death, she altered her first name, last name, and address. After Jerry's demise, she repeated this action. The case concluded successfully in court, and after only 2 days of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Cherie Miller was found guilty of second-degree murder, and on January 9, 2001, she received a life sentence in prison. However, several complaints arose from the defense regarding the trial. One notable issue questioned the admissibility of Jerry's letter as evidence. This concern led to such significant implications that 7 years later, in 2008, a judge ordered a retrial for the case. Consequently, as per federal court decisions, Cherie was released from prison in July 2009 until further trials could be conducted. For over 3 years, she walked free without restrictions, even accessing internet and dating sites. However, many individuals, especially Bruce's and Jerry's families, opposed this release, deeming it due to an absurd technicality. Back in August 2012, the district court reversed its decision, and Cherie returned to prison, where she has remained since. While she was at large, Cherie successfully reconnected with her children. This reconnection had a notably positive impact on her. In April 2016, she wrote a letter admitting guilt despite previously denying it. She explained that her initial denial stemmed from fear that an admission would hinder her chances of appealing for a retrial. Her attorneys had advised such action. However, they later denied this claim. They asserted that if they had known about her guilt earlier, they would have recommended pursuing a plea deal. Under such circumstances, Cherie would have faced only 15 years of imprisonment, as opposed to the longer term she is currently serving. By then, Cherie had already spent 2 decades behind bars. Notably, during this time, she entered into her 4th marriage with Michael Denoy. Michael learned about her story through media reports and became interested in her situation, eventually proposing during their first meeting.
Have you heard the story about the nuclear power plant employee from Springfield who is having problems with his wife? No, we're not talking about Homer Simpson. We're talking about this guy. Sounds legit, right? Wrong. What you heard just now is the voice of an extremely talented liar. In 1995, Mark Winger, a nuclear power plant technician in Springfield, Illinois, murdered his wife by beating her to death with a hammer. In an even darker twist to the story, he framed someone else for the murder, married their child's nanny shortly afterwards, and got away with murder for nearly 4 years. So how did he do it? Hi, and welcome to Mysterious 7. I'm Michael, and today I'm going to take you guys through another case with the most insane twists you've ever heard. In June of 1995, it seemed like life couldn't possibly get any better for Mark and Donna Winger. The nuclear technician and his wife had been happily married for several years, and they had just adopted a newborn baby girl named Bailey. Donna was the oldest of 3 sisters in what they described as an incredibly close-knit family. The Dreschers grew to love Mark too. He was smart, Jewish. He was attractive and he was fun, Donna's sister Jenny Levin told the media. Donna just felt like she had found her person. After Mark and Donna Winger were married in 1989, he was offered a job, and the newlyweds settled in Springfield, Illinois. We always joked about the fact when one sister marries, that husband marries 3 sisters, Levin said. We shared our lives with Mark. Donna was working as an operating room technician and Mark was a nuclear engineer. Donna couldn't have been happier. The only thing she would have liked to was to have a child, her stepfather, Ira Drescher, said. Donna's mother, Sarah Jane Drescher, said her daughter was overwhelmed when she learned that she could not get pregnant. But then one day while working at the hospital, a doctor told Donna that a teenager was looking to put her baby up for adoption. Adopting the child was an easy decision for her. She looked at me with tears when she said, "Michelle, I knew it the minute they put the baby into my arms. She has always been mine," Donna's sister Michelle Hansen said. The Wingers welcomed baby Bailey into their home on June 1st, 1995. Donna's family said the couple loved their new roles as parents. They seemed to have all the makings of a long and happy life together. Mark was just as excited to become a dad as Donna was to become a mom, Hansen said. Donna had met the woman who would eventually become her best friend, Deanne Schultz, at the hospital. And with the arrival of Bailey, the two bonded over motherhood. But then everything turned dark. In August 1995, Donna took baby Bailey on a trip to Hollywood, Florida, to visit Donna's family. Her mother had just dropped the 2 of them off at the airport and hired a driver to pick them up in St. Louis, Missouri, and drive them back to Springfield. So after the visit, the 2 flew into St. Louis Airport and hopped in a cab driven by Roger Harrington with a 2-hour ride back to Springfield. During the course of the drive, Harrington reportedly began flirting with Donna and talking about drugs and orgies. Detective Charlie Cox, a police officer who investigated Donna's death, later said, "This gentleman started opening up to Donna about issues he was having. He had a voice in his head named Dom. Dom would tell him to do bad things. Recently, Dom was telling him to hurt people." After Donna safely arrived home with Bailey, she called the transit company to make a formal complaint about Harrington's behavior, and the driver was suspended. Cox later said that the driver started flirting with Donna, telling her he liked older women and even invited her to attend what he described as one of his sex parties. Donna had told her family that the ride was terrifying because he was driving erratically at 75 miles per hour. After the harrowing ride, Donna had been the victim of some strange phone calls, Weinhoft said. The family had believed that the driver had been stalking her and was a danger. Donna called the limousine company to file a complaint and Harrington was suspended. Mark argued his wife to write down the story in case they might need it. Police later found the note describing Donna's harrowing ride in her handwriting at the crime scene. Donna also told Mark about the experience, and though he played a part of the supportive husband and helped her file the complaint, it turned out that he had ulterior motives for doing so. Just days later, Mark invited Harrington to their home, perhaps under the pretense of helping him get his job back. On the 29th of August 1995, the cab driver wrote Mark's name, address, and the time on a scrap of paper in his car, drove to the Wingers' home, walked inside with a coffee cup and a pack of cigarettes, and was shot twice in the head. Mark Winger then called 911 and told the dispatcher he'd just shot a man who was killing his wife. He informed police that he'd been walking on the treadmill in the basement when he heard a commotion upstairs. He grabbed his gun, went to investigate, and found Harrington swinging a hammer at Donna. In an effort to defend his wife, he'd shot the man twice. Police arrived on the scene to find that both Donna and Harrington still had a weak pulse. Mark was in a back bedroom rolling back and forth in total shock. When former Springfield Police Detective Charlie Cox arrived at the Wingers' home, he remembered they could see the victims from the front door. Donna was clinging to life, said Sangamon County Assistant State Attorney Steve Weinholt. She had been hit no less than 7 times in the head with a hammer. The second victim, a white man, had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head, but still had a pulse when police arrived, said Weinholt. It was quite chaotic, Cox said. I knew that they were probably going to be transporting the victim soon, so I wanted to try and get identification on the male suspect. Cox found the man's wallet and was able to identify him as Roger Harrington. police recovered a bloody hammer near the two bodies and found Mark's .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun, a yellow mug, and a pack of cigarettes on the same dining table. They also noticed that Harrington's car had been parked against traffic, facing the wrong direction. At the crime scene, Cox said Mark was very upset and very emotional, and that he repeatedly asked who the man he'd killed was. Cox avoided identifying Harrington and tried to calm Mark down. As police combed through the scene, Mark asked police if the intruder's name was Roger. Cox confirmed that it was. Mark was shocked and he said, "Oh my gosh, that's the man who's been harassing my wife this week," Cox said. Cox, who was familiar with Harrington after he'd lived in a trailer park owned by Cox, believed Harrington might have snapped. "I knew him as a very volatile type subject. He and his wife rented a trailer for me," Cox said. "Knowing what I knew about Mr. Harrington in the past, how quick he was to anger, I thought that very well he could have gone over there to try to get his job back. There's a hammer laying right there on the table. He picks it up and goes into a rage, then the husband shoots the bad guy." Tragically, both victims succumbed to their injuries. After learning about Donna's previous run-in with Harrington and listening to Mark's version of events, the police closed the case within days, listing Roger Harrington as the culprit. Because once police examined the scene and listened to Mark's story, detectives concluded that he had acted in self-defense. The case was closed in about 48 hours, Weinhoft said. But Harrington's family insisted from the beginning that their son was harmless. "He was no troublemaker. He was a good kid. He wouldn't even strike at anybody," his mother, Helen Harrington, said. "I don't think he would hurt anybody, and I don't think he was crazy." So it seemed like Mark Winger was going to get away with murder. Donna's mother spoke to the media about the evening, and the family received the news of her daughter's murder. "It was 4 a.m, and I said, 'Jenny, it's Mom. Something terrible has happened,' Sarah Jane Drescher said of her call to Levin. "We sat there in my room, just crying at this unimaginable loss," Levin said. In the following months, Donna's mother and sister took turns traveling to Illinois to help take care of Bailey. "I loved Mark because he loved Donna, and that's what was important to me," Sarah Jane Drescher said. "But I had to be very careful because I did not want to ruin my relationship with him, because I did not want to ruin my relationship with the baby. I wanted to be a grandma, and Bailey made me a grandma." Mark was now a single father raising his infant daughter on his own. Donna's family initially flew to Illinois to help out, but they couldn't stay, and they suggested Mark hire a nanny. In January 1996, he met 23-year-old Rebecca Simic, who was searching for a nanny job in the area. Rebecca told reporters, "It just felt like Bailey was the one that really needed me the most. She had been through so much already at the age of 3 months." Rebecca was wonderful with Bailey, and even Donna's family agreed that she was like an angel sent to help Mark. While she felt a little uncomfortable in the house, where 2 people had died violently, she was dedicated to giving Bailey a good childhood despite the trauma of losing her mother. "I didn't want to like Rebecca, but it was hard not to like her," Levin said. "Seeing her with Bailey, there was really nothing bad we could say about her." Meanwhile, Rebecca's role at Mark's home had begun to evolve. When you live with someone and you're taking care of a child together, it's very easy to kind of play house, Rebecca said later on. Rebecca told the media that she was blown away by what the infant had been through in such a short time. "Mark made me feel like I was like an angel sent to him from God or Donna, and it was my purpose to make this family whole again," Rebecca said. She lost 2 mothers by the time she was 3 months old, and she was so smiley, Rebecca said. "I wanted to get in there and say, I'm going to help and I'm going to make this little girl's life better." Mark helped Rebecca feel at ease in her new role. After a few months, the two found themselves sharing conversation and a glass of wine at the end of a long day. And then one thing led to another as their relationship turned intimate. Within the year, Rebecca was pregnant with Mark's child. The couple eloped in Hawaii in October 1996, just 14 months after Donna's death. "I remember asking him how he could move on so quickly," Rebecca later recalled. "And he explained to me that when you have a good marriage, it's natural for you to just want that again." Rebecca said Mark had told her he wasn't able to have children, so she said she was very surprised when she found out she was pregnant with his child only months after moving in. "Obviously, I wasn't careful. It was just kind of a shock," she said. Mark, on the other hand, was thrilled, Rebecca recalled. "It felt like it was a victory to him," she said. "Mark put pressure on me to marry him and have children with him." Rebecca said that Mark, who was Jewish when they met, even started going to church with her. She said he told her they could raise a family in a Christian home. "I would be honored to be your husband and blessed if you were my wife," Mark wrote in a letter to Rebecca. Mark's rabbi, Michael Datz, asked him about his change in faith, and he said that Mark explained, "Judaism is just too difficult and unforgiving." Rabbi Datz didn't understand, asking, "Mark, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you need forgiveness for?" He said Mark didn't respond. But then it seemed like Mark was trying almost a little too hard to leave the past behind. 16 months after his wife's death, Mark told Sarah Jane Drescher that he was going to sell the house where her daughter Donna had died and buy another one just outside of town. He and Rebecca had started a family of their own, and he started cutting ties with Donna's parents. "I received a letter from Mark one day saying to me I could not be called Grandma," Sarah Jane Drescher said. "I wrote him back and I begged him, please let her call me Grandma. And he said, I'm sorry, there's no way I am going to allow her to call you Grandma, and that's the way it is." Sarah said she mourned that loss for a long time. Bailey Simic, now 25, told reporters that her grandmother and grandfather, Ira Drescher, would send a birthday card to her every year. "I always remember asking my mom, 'Who's Sarah Jane and Ira?' she said. My mom would always explain, like, 'Those are Donna's parents, and they just want to let you know that, like, they love you and that they remember you.'" Eventually, Mark sold the house where Donna had died and moved with his new wife to the suburbs outside of Springfield. Things seemed great on the surface. They had 3 children together, and Rebecca raised Bailey as her daughter. Though chaotic, their life seemed almost perfect. Mark was a loving partner and a very involved father. That would all change quite soon. One day in early 1909, when Mark was feeling ill, Rebecca took him to the emergency room in the hospital where Donna had worked before her death. There they saw Donna's best friend and co-worker, Deanne Schultz. She seemed upset to see Mark, and Rebecca remembered that Deanne had acted strangely when she first came on Bailey's nanny, as if she were anxious to stay involved in Bailey's life. After they returned home, Mark commented that that may not be the last they heard from Deanne. He was right. In February 1999, Deanne dropped a bombshell on the police, revealing that she and Mark had been having an affair before Donna's death. She said that at one point, he'd remarked to her that things would be easier for them if Donna was dead. She told them that after Donna's fateful ride with Roger Harrington, Mark said that he needed to get that driver to the house. "All you'd need to do is find the body," he told her. Deanne never thought Mark was serious, but when Donna turned up dead soon after, she knew he had done it. Mark had threatened her not to tell anyone about the things he'd said, and she'd attempted suicide several times while struggling with her guilt. After seeing him in the hospital, she decided she couldn't keep quiet any longer. After hearing Deanne's story, police decided to take a closer look at the evidence from the day of the murders. The more they thought about what they'd once assumed was an open and shut case, the more questions they had. Why were there no signs of forced entry into the Winger home that August day? Why would Roger Harrington bring his cup of coffee and cigarettes into the house with him if he'd planned to attack Donna? And why would he use the Winger's hammer as a weapon when he had a tire iron and a knife in his car? At that point, investigators came upon 3 never-before-seen Polaroid photos taken the day of the murders. They'd been with the evidence collected in a civil suit Mark had filed against the transportation company that had employed Harrington. The position of the bodies in the photos showed that Mark's version of events were not possible. Mark Winger had stated that Roger Harrington was kneeling right next to Donna Winger's head, and he was beating her with a hammer, Weinhoft explained. He stated that he shot him and that the man fell backward, so that his feet remained near Donna's head. In reality, the Polaroid photographs show the exact opposite. Blood spatter experts agreed. Cox later told the media, "I was ashamed of the way the investigation went. I heard Roger Harrington's family. I ran his name through hell for no reason. I mean, he was an innocent victim. It had become clear that Mark was the real murderer behind the scenes the whole time." Rebecca Simic was left to make sense of the tragedy. She had no idea what Mark was capable of, and afterward, she moved her 4 children out of Springfield to feel safer. While Mark had tried to keep Bailey away from Donna's family, Rebecca encouraged them to be reunited. "We'd been hurt a lot by the same person," Rebecca said, "but it didn't break us." Donna's family and Rebecca spoke to reporters about the horrific realization that Mark was a manipulative killer hiding behind the mask of a brilliant engineer and a kind, loving husband and father. In December 1999, more than 4 years after the murders, the Springfield State Journal-Register ran an article based on allegations in the civil lawsuit that Mark had arranged the murder himself and killed both his wife and Harrington. The allegations were based on a blood spatter expert hired by BART Transportation in the case after the arrest of their employee Harrington. Everything came to a head. It changed everything, Rebecca said of the article. I mean, it went from Mark as the hero who was defending his wife, this noble stand-up guy that every man wanted to pat on the back, to a manipulative, deviant murderer. As the detectives continued their reinvestigation, they learned that Harrington's roommate, Susan Collins, had initially told police that someone asked to meet with Harrington on the day of the murders and that she'd seen Harrington on the phone arranging that meeting. Inside Harrington's car, they found a note written on a bank deposit slip with Mark's name, his address, and the time to be there. Roger Harrington was not an intruder, but rather he was lured into that home by Mark Winger, Weinhoft said. Deanne Schultz's cooperation with police and evidence that raised questions about Mark's story prompted the voluntary dismissal of the civil suit against BART Transportation. I didn't see it coming, Rebecca said. I didn't know that this whole investigation was brewing. I never thought the whole time that they thought my husband was a diabolical murderer. A warrant was issued for Mark's arrest, and he was taken into custody while at work. I had made plans to go to McDonald's Playland, Rebecca recalled. We were there and I got a phone call, and it was Mark's secretary, and she told me that Mark had just been arrested. I was just sick. Like my whole body kind of went numb, and I just couldn't believe it. I was shaking so badly, and I just remembered feeling so scared. I felt that I owed it to him and to my kids to just stand by him, she said. Hanson, Donna's sister, said she didn't feel relieved following Mark's arrest. I still wanted to believe he was innocent, she said. Here's this person that I know in handcuffs, and what's gonna happen? Bailey was just 6 years old at the time of Mark's arrest. She said no longer having her father home was scary. I just remember everyone just trying to remain calm and kind of, at the time, being like, Dad's just going away for a while and that he'll be back soon, she said. But that was no longer possible. On August 23, 2001, Mark Winger was indicted for the murders of Donna Winger and Roger Harrington. At the trial in May 2002, a visibly shaky Deanne testified against Mark. The court granted her immunity in exchange for her testimony, though there was no evidence linking her to anything other than keeping Mark's terrible secret. Mark was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. One of the key points the prosecution had to prove was that Harrington had gone to the house to meet with the Wingers, not to commit a murder. They presented the cigarettes and coffee mug that he'd brought inside, as well as the weapons he'd left in his car and the note with Mark's name and address. Mark's attorney argued that Harrington was mentally ill, that he behaved erratically, and that these traits indicated he was capable of murder. When prosecutors presented the Polaroid showing the position of the bodies before they were removed from the scene, Mark's attorney argued throughout the trial that first responders could have moved the bodies. It's our belief that Roger comes to the house, he's allowed into the home, now retired Detective Jim Graham said. There were no signs of forced entry, and he was executed at that time. Hearing the gunshot, Donna Winger then comes from the bathroom to investigate. He then beats his wife to death with a hammer. Mark then calls 911. In the 911 call, someone can be heard moaning in the background. When Mark tells the operator he can hear his baby crying and hangs up. He had told the operator there was a bullet in Harrington's head, but when police arrived, Harrington had been shot twice. Deanne also gave damning testimony at the trial, saying that Mark told her it would be easier if Donna just died. I thought it was crazy talk, she said during her cross-examination. After a chance meeting years later, Deanne testified that she confronted Mark in the hopes of gathering information and asked him how he lived with himself, and that he'd replied that he had found Jesus Christ and was forgiven. She said he warned her that if she ever said anything, they would both be in trouble. I didn't think that anybody would believe her, Rebecca said. I just thought if Mark truly did that, she would have come forward right away. Mark's defense argued that Deanne was emotionally unstable and just a woman who had been scorned. Deanne Schultz's testimony was able to demonstrate that in reality, Mark was obviously unhappy, unfaithful, and had specifically talked about wanting to kill his wife, Weinhoft said. Schultz was granted immunity for her testimony, he added, There was no direct evidence that directly linked Deanne to actively participating in this crime. In the end, she was such a valuable witness as it relates to presenting the motive. After a trial that lasted 3 weeks, the jury found Mark Winger guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Rebecca said she believed he would be going home with them. After the verdict, she said the words guilty rang through her head and that she wanted the earth to open up and swallow me. Sarah Jane Drescher and her daughters, Donna's sisters, were with her when they heard the verdict. The 3 of us just embraced and cried, she said. And the story gets even more twisted, because 4 years later, Mark was also sentenced to an additional 35 years in prison when he tried to hire a hitman to kill Deanne or testifying against him. He even attempted to put out a hit against a childhood friend who had refused to pay his bail. Helen Harrington was relieved and grateful that her son had been vindicated of Donna's murder. We knew that Roger was innocent, and it finally got proven, she said. He was branded a murderer at the time, but then all this came to an end. The police also had to come to terms with the faulty initial investigation. I was ashamed of the way the investigation went, Cox said. I hurt Roger Harrington's family. I ran his name through hell for no reason. I mean, he was an innocent victim. The police department had too hastily closed the case and turned a blind eye to some red flags, and to right such a wrong, it felt great, Bram added. But Rebecca said there wasn't any closure for her or her family. When we lose someone, we gather. We have a funeral, Rebecca shared. But when someone goes to prison, well, what do? You're just kind of left with this emptiness and this hole that you can't really have closure with that. It wasn't just him being sentenced to life, she said. We were sentenced to a life of a father in prison. Bailey Simic says she missed having her father around while growing up. It was really hard being in school, seeing all the other kids had their dads and that relationship, she said. And now suddenly, I couldn't just go to my dad's room or have him pick us up from school or anything like that. Ben Simic was only a year old when his dad went to prison. I can look at the pictures and look at myself and say, that kid has no idea. He was way too young to know anything that was going on, he said. Rebecca had to move out of Springfield with her kids, and the home that she'd bought with Mark was foreclosed. She had been a stay-at-home mom for 7 years, so she had no option but to file for bankruptcy. I didn't have anything to give my kids. Everything had been taken away. All I had was love, she said. Rebecca never remarried as far as we know. She raised all 4 of the children on her own. And Bailey has since reunited with Donna's family. It was so incredible to see that there's this whole big family that loves me, and Sarah Jane still has my baby picture on her kitchen counter with all of her other grandkids, even though we've been gone for so long, she said. We've been hurt a lot by the same person, but it didn't break us, Rebecca said. Although Sarah Jane Drescher says there will never be closure for the murder of her daughter, the family has worked together to set up Donna's Fund, which is a part of Women in Distress, an organization that works to provide shelter for women trying to escape abuse. I think her legacy will live on through people that we help, Levin said, and through the beautiful memories that we have of her. So what do you think of this crazy, twisted case of murder uncovered? Would Mark Winger still be walking scot-free today if his former lover, Deanne Schultz, hadn't developed a guilty conscience? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And don't forget to like, share, and hit the subscribe for more in-depth coverage of some of the most manipulative murders of all time. Stay safe, friends. Until next time. On December 20th, 2017, a press conference was held during which Mark Perez, special agent in charge of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, announced a breakthrough in the disappearance of Mike Williams, a Tallahassee real estate appraiser who was originally presumed to have drowned while duck hunting on Lake Seminole on December 16, 2000, and was eaten by alligators. Being here now, I can tell you what happened to Mike Williams, Perez said. Mike Williams did not drown in the lake. He wasn't eaten by alligators. He didn't leave town and leave his wife and 18-month-old daughter behind. He was murdered. In the interest of the investigation, we cannot yet release details, but I am happy to report that this morning investigators notified the Williams family of recent discoveries in the case. Today's story is not only about love, betrayal, infidelity, and greed, but also about a mother's resilience. For 17 years and 4 days, Cheryl Williams, Mike's mom, disagreed that her son had drowned in Lake Seminole and pushed with tenacity for law enforcement to investigate her son's disappearance.
She believed with all her heart that those responsible would be punished, believed even when no one else did. I had two choices. He was alive or dead. I chose to believe he was alive, and I really think that's what helped me, Cheryl said on December 20th, 2017. A lot of people called me crazy, but if I had given up, we never would have found him. The day before the press conference, Brian Winchester, a close friend of Mike and his wife Denise, who later married Brian, was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Mike's mother was right. Retribution came to those responsible, and ironically, they were the cause of the truth coming out. In 2000, Brian and Denise's affair, which began in 1997, turned into a murder. And years later, they went from lovers to strangers who didn't trust each other. Brian was very afraid that after the divorce, Denise would inform the police about what had happened to Mike, so he attacked her. Denise, on the other hand, went to great lengths to get him a life sentence. She was very persuasive in asking the jury for the maximum sentence, and it was these efforts that led to Brian having nothing to lose, and he made a deal with the prosecutor. Brian was sentenced to 20 years in 2017 for the kidnapping of Denise Williams, but he avoided a life sentence. Denise was celebrating the victory and was unaware that the conviction was part of a deal in which Brian Winchester, 49, admitted to planning the murder and a 17-year cover-up of the murder, and received immunity from any prosecution for his role in the case. In exchange, he led investigators to Mike's body and gave a full and truthful confession. It would only be a few months later, and on May 8, 2018, Denise Williams would be arrested. At first glance, things are a little confusing, aren't they? Let's break down this case in detail. Jerry Michael Williams was born on October 16, 1969, in Bradfordville, north of Tallahassee, the son of a bus driver and a kindergarten teacher. Family and friends called him Mike. Even though the family didn't have much money, and the boy, along with his older brother, grew up living in a trailer, those were happy times. The parents cared about their son's future, and instead of building a house, they set aside money for the education of both boys, who themselves worked part-time at night in supermarkets. The sons enrolled in North Florida Christian High School. There, Mike excelled. He became student council president, played soccer, and was active in the Key Club. At the age of 15, Mike started duck hunting as a hobby and met Denise Merrill. The young lad was a soccer player and student council president. Denise was a cheerleader and council secretary, and they began dating. Friends thought they were a great couple. While still in high school, Mike became best friends with Brian Winchester, whom Denise introduced him to. Brian later had a friend, Katie Thomas, and the two couples remained friends for the rest of Mike's life. After high school, Mike attended Florida State University, where he majored in political science and urban planning. The lovers graduated together. Denise became a public accountant. Mike became a real estate appraiser. Mike proved to be a valuable worker. He often worked 15 hours a day, and of course his career took off. In 1994, the young, successful man married Denise. It was around this time that Brian married Kathy as well. All four of them continued to stay in close contact. Mike loved his wife dearly, strived to provide for their family as best he could, and had incredible energy. At the age of 31, Mike Williams achieved considerable success. As a real estate appraiser, he was earning nearly $200,000 a year. The couple was able to afford a home in a small, upscale neighborhood on the east side of town, and in 1999 became happy parents. They had a daughter, whom the couple named Ansley. Mike's friends told me that he was always prudent. Since the young man was engaged in quite risky activities, he wanted to be sure that in case of disaster, his family would definitely be taken care of. Not surprisingly, Mike turned to his best friend, who was working as an insurance agent at the time. Brian sold him 2 insurance policies for $250,000 and later for $500,000. In 2000, Mike's father passed away. Williams was so stunned by this suddenness that, wanting to financially secure his own family, he again turned to a friend. Brian helped Mike to insure his life for $1 million. Thus, about 6 months before his disappearance, the life of the loving father of the family was insured for almost $2 million. According to Denise, on the morning of December 16, 2000, Her husband woke up early to go duck hunting on Lake Seminole, a large reservoir connected to the Apalachicola River. It was the day of their 6th wedding anniversary, and the couple planned to celebrate the date at night in Apalachicola, a small town on the bayou. The wife and daughter waited for Mike at home at noon, but he never returned. Naturally, Denise became concerned and called her father, who in turn called Mike's best friend, Brian Winchester. Together with his father, Brian drove to Lake Seminole. There they found Mike's Ford Bronco car near the boat dock. But Mike himself was nowhere to be found. The men went around to all the places Mike liked to hunt, but couldn't even find the boat. So they decided to call the police. After investigators from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency were called, the search for Mike began. A few hours later, a helicopter pilot found the boat drifting about 225 feet from the boat ramp. A search of the boat turned up Mike's shotgun, still in its case. Apparently, he never got to use it. The search became a rescue operation. Locals believed that before the 3 rivers were dammed to form the lake, the reservoir was the site of an orchard. Thus, the lake got its name Stump Field, due to the many remaining stumps that protruded above and below the water level, requiring careful handling of any motorized boat in the area. Because of this, searchers speculated that Williams hit a stump on his boat, fell out, and submerged himself in the water. His wading boots filled with water, and he probably drowned when he couldn't get out. Several other agencies were called in to help, including a dive team from Montgomery, Alabama, and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. But the extensive and methodical search yielded nothing. Mike was never located. A week passed and the rescue operation turned into a body search operation. Teams were given probe holes to probe the bottom of the lake, and dogs were brought to the site. 10 days into the search, volunteers found a camouflage-patterned hunting hat that could not be linked to Williams. Officials with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency speculated that Mike had been eaten by alligators, which is why the body could not be found. There were actually quite a few alligators living in the lake. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement found no signs indicating a violent death and agreed with that theory. After 5 weeks, the search was called off. The day after the search was called off, Denise held a memorial service for Mike, less than 2 months after the alleged accident. It seemed to everyone that Denise had come to terms with the loss of her husband, but Mike's mother had not. 6 months later, in June 2001, an angler discovered wading boots floating in the lake. Divers searched the lake area and retrieved a lightweight hunting jacket and flashlight from the bottom. In one of the jacket's pockets was a hunting license with Williams's name and signature. The find raised many questions. Neither the hunting jacket nor the boots had visible teeth marks indicative of an alligator attack. None of the items found showed signs of having been in the water for 6 months. The boots were not slimy and the flashlight still worked. However, a week later, Denise's attorney asked the court to declare Mike Williams dead. Based on the items found, he suggested that alligators and other aquatic life had swallowed the body whole. The motion was granted. The death certificate said Mike died on December 16, 2000. Cause of death: accidental drowning while duck hunting on Lake Seminole. The body has yet to be recovered. This is how Mike Williams' story might have ended if not for Cheryl Williams, who refused to give up and continued to search for her son. "All I know is that I can't stop looking for him until I find him," she said. Cheryl's efforts seriously strained her relationship with her former sister-in-law. Denise demanded she stop searching and accept reality. She said, "I'm tired of seeing articles about Mike and his disappearance. I just want to move on with my life. If you keep pushing this investigation, you will never see your granddaughter again." Cheryl couldn't give up on her son, and Denise carried out her threat. If not for the mother's persistence, her son's story might have remained submerged at the bottom of a dark, algae-covered lake. It took Cheryl Williams 3 years to convince law enforcement officials to open an investigation into her young son's disappearance. "I made phone calls, put up signs about my missing son, wrote to the governor of Florida every day, compiled my notes into an evidence book, asked people to post on social media, and contacted reporters," Cheryl will tell you years later. The persistent mother contacted Matthew Oresco, an alligator expert. In his response, he explained that alligators do not feed during the cold winter months. Cold weather causes water temperatures to drop, so alligators don't feed in the winter. All they do is maintain their body temperature. 14 degrees is too cold for an alligator to be interested in food at all. Moreover, Oresco wrote that after an alligator kill, there is always forensic evidence left behind. Eventually, after 3 years, Cheryl Williams convinced law enforcement to drop the ridiculous alligator theory and launch an official investigation into her son's disappearance. The case was reopened because of little-known facts regarding alligators' eating habits. Evidence gathered from interviews and a little official data convinced investigators that Williams' death was no accident. My gut feeling is that Mike did not die in Lake Seminole, and that's the general consensus of all the law enforcement agencies working on this case, said Rami Austin, a former investigator with the 2nd District State's Attorney's Office who prosecuted Mike's case. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency initially took over the case because Williams was considered a missing hunter. Officers spent 735 hours searching a 10-acre section of the lake for the body, but didn't spend a minute looking for signs of wrongdoing. Jackson County Sheriff's deputies brought in to help with the search also did not consider other possibilities. Investigators interviewed everyone involved in the search, and police officer David Arnett, who was present at the scene that day, years later said, "Some things immediately look strange. Williams didn't usually hunt alone. His truck was found in an undeveloped area from which he would have had to drag the boat over mud, not on the nearby concrete boat launch he usually used. A terrible storm that night should have pushed the boat to the east shore, but it was found on the west shore. The boat's motor wasn't running, but it was full of gasoline. If Mike had been driving the boat and fell out of it, it would have continued to float in circles until it ran out of gas." Unfortunately, law enforcement began to doubt too late that they were dealing with a simple drowning. The crime scene had already been trampled by numerous volunteers and searchers. A car that could have served as a clue was taken by the family without any verification. Potential witnesses were missed. Denise Williams and Brian Winchester became suspicious to investigators because they learned that Winchester had divorced his wife Kathy and married Denise. They also learned of Denise's unexpected financial gain of nearly $2 million from her late husband's life insurance policy. Detectives determined that it was Winchester who sold the policy to Mike. They also found it strange that Denise, as Mike's wife, did not want to have anything to do with the investigation and tried to prevent Cheryl's activity, even forbidding the grandmother to communicate with her granddaughter. In 2005, the newly married couple were called in for questioning, which gave nothing new to the investigation. Brian provided an alibi for the morning of the disappearance of Mike Williams. He said he was 60 miles from the lake, at home, in bed, as his ex-wife Kathy could attest. He said he had intended to go hunting with his father-in-law in the morning, but overslept. Denise's interrogation also yielded no new leads. In 2008, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement announced that Mike's disappearance was not an accident, and they believe he was the victim of a crime. However, without sufficient evidence, they alas cannot prosecute. We have suspicions, but we need proof. Another investigation failed to find out her son's fate, but Cheryl Williams did not give up again. Her efforts led to the Discovery Cable Channel doing a story on Mike's disappearance and subsequent investigations in late 2011. By then, Cheryl had become disillusioned with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, believing it was either incompetent or uninterested in solving the case. Beginning in 2012, Mike's mother wrote about 1 letter a day to the governor, Rick Scott, asking him to either assign the investigation to another agency or appoint a special prosecutor to do so. Cheryl sent 2,600 letters to the governor over 9 years. In 2012, Denise caught Brian cheating and they broke up. The following year, Denise filed for divorce. After a few more years, an appraisal of the former family home was to take place, after which even property issues would no longer bind them. This event was a turning point in Mike's case. Brian didn't want a divorce. Denise didn't want to continue the relationship. They were constantly fighting, and the Williams investigation was poking fun at them. Brian would call Denise, and she stopped returning his calls. He couldn't handle the stress level. On August 5, 2016, the day a real estate appraisal was due as part of a court order, Denise left her home to drive to work at Florida State University. While talking to her sister on the phone, she saw someone climb over the back seat of her car. It turned out to be Winchester. Brian pressed a loaded gun against Denise's ribs and told her to drive straight ahead. He said he had to do that because she wasn't answering his calls. Denise tried to calm Brian down, agreed with everything he said, and promised to give him a chance to save their marriage. Brian believed it. Denise assured him that she wouldn't go to the police and report what he had just done, and Brian got out of the car. As he got out, he took the brown sheet, plastic sheeting, bleach sprayer, and tools with him. It became clear that Denise had miraculously escaped death. Denise called emergency services. Brian was quickly arrested and charged with kidnapping, which is a first-degree felony in Florida and carries a life sentence as the maximum penalty. He was also charged with domestic violence and armed burglary. The court decided to keep Brian in custody without bail. Cheryl Williams expressed hope that this development will lead to the solving of her son's disappearance case. "Brian is not going to let Denise run around alone with all that money," she told the New York Daily News. "I pray that he will tell us what really happened." And Brian did tell, bargaining himself an extremely favorable deal with the prosecutor and avoiding a life sentence. "At first, I think we were all doing really well. But I wasn't a good husband," Brian began his story. "One day I found a note in my first wife Kathy's purse and realized she was cheating on me. I wanted revenge. We often went to bars and concerts with Denise and Mike. I had been friends with Denise since high school. I was never really attracted to her. But after Kathy cheated on me, I started looking at other women differently." The affair between Brian and Denise began in October 1997. One-time drunken sex at a rock concert quickly escalated to frequent secret meetings. "We started meeting at hotels during the workday. We met whenever we had the opportunity." Brian recounted. He did not want to divorce. Denise made it clear that she would never divorce her husband. Public opinion was important to her, and she did not want to share custody of her daughter. Over time, the affair became more than just meeting for casual sex. Denise and Brian thought of themselves as a couple, exchanging gifts and love letters. It became clear that they couldn't go on like this. They could not be without each other, and divorce was unacceptable to Denise. Her pious image was not to be harmed. Around this time, Mike almost died in a hunting accident. Brian saved him, and Denise suddenly saw a way out of the situation. After the deal with the prosecutor, Brian will reveal, "The year 2000 prompted us to start talking about Mike and Kathy's death. Denise wanted it all on me, not her, and she wanted a scenario where it wasn't a murder but an accident. She wanted death to be left up to God. That way she could live with it." After considering various options, Brian and Denise settled on a boating accident. In doing so, they timed the murder so that they could get the maximum possible payout on Mike's life insurance policy. They both realized that Mike had to be killed before one of the 3 policies expired at the end of December 2000. The plan was in place. Brian called his friend to go hunting. He said he'd found a great spot on the shores of Lake Seminole. Mike expected to go there with Brian and return home by noon to celebrate his anniversary with his wife. "I told him that we were going to go to a special place and that he absolutely had to bring his wading boots with him. I had to make sure he took them with him because it was believed that if you fell overboard in wading boots, you would drown very quickly." The plan was to make death look like an accidental drowning. Once Brian and Mike were in the water, Brian pushed Mike out of the boat, but instead of sinking, he grabbed onto the stumps and began to wade through them to the shore. Brian panicked. "I didn't know what to do." Mike started calling loudly for help. "I didn't know how to get out of this situation. I had a shotgun. I was panicking and I shot him in the head. I didn't think about what I was doing. Things didn't go according to plan, and I needed to cover up what happened. There was hardly any time left. I should have been back home by now and getting ready to go hunting with my father-in-law. No one knew I was at the lake with Mike, so I decided it would be best for me to drive home and pretend like I had overslept. I drove home and hoped that Kathy was still asleep. I entered the house as quietly as I could. Katie was asleep. My phone was on the floor. I went to bed, called my father-in-law, and apologized. Brian did everything he could to create an alibi for himself. Then he hid the body. Denise didn't know that Brian had shot Mike in the head and buried him. Brian tried to tell her, but she didn't want to listen. It was enough for her that her husband was gone. Denise wanted to go on living with the idea that it was God who kept him from swimming out and let him drown. According to Brian, they promised each other that neither of them would ever say anything. Denise and Brian justified what happened by saying that the main reason Mike was killed was because it was impossible for them to live together. "We said the money was just the cherry on the cake," Brian would pronounce in court. Investigators learned that it was Brian who planted a hat, boots, flashlight, and license. First, he needed to keep searchers from leaving a lake, and afterwards he needed grounds to pronounce Mike dead so Denise could get insurance, since a recognition process usually takes about 5 years. The lovers managed it in just 7 months. Including Social Security and other benefits, Denise received about $2 million. On May 8, 2018, Denise Williams was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory to a felony, which carried a life sentence. Denise pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. In February 2019, she was sentenced to life in prison. 5 months later, Mike and Denise's daughter, Ansley, received all of her late father's assets and insurance money owed to Denise. In January 2020, Denise Williams appealed the conviction and life sentence. Her attorney argued before Florida's First District Court of Appeal that there was no evidence that she was involved in committing the murder. In November 2020, the murder conviction was overturned, but the 30-year sentence for conspiracy to commit murder was upheld. Denise is now in custody at the Florida Women's Reception Center. She will be 78 years old when she is released. Brian Winchester was transferred to Madison Correctional Institute in Florida to serve the remainder of his sentence. His current release date is set for July 30th, 2036. He will be 67 years old. Ansley, daughter of Mike and Denise, insists her mother is innocent and places the blame on Brian Winchester. She refused to speak to any media regarding the outcome of the case and her personal life. According to Cheryl and Nick, Ansley's uncle, they have not been able to connect with Ansley. Cheryl is very sorry that she has lost not only her son, but also her granddaughter.